a copy of the latest work plan draft. There will be some modifications to that before, possibly after this meeting, and then some other notations that we made, and you will receive that in your inbox no later than end of business day Monday. But other than that, I will go ahead and we'll proceed with our remainder items for this evening. We have three. Two were in our bike valet. We didn't have a chance to get to them. And the third is administrative matters for OSS, but we'll just discuss continuing ed interest and needs. So with that, we will go into our two outstanding bike valet items, excuse me. The first one was climate change planning, or GHG reduction goals. For everyone's edification, this did come up last year during our retreat, but we weren't able to fit it into our work plan schedule. And as you're well aware, we had a lot of other initiatives last year and several strategic planning initiatives going on right now. And the reason why we're bringing it before you today is because it has come up before. Some other transit agencies, have plans to reduce greenhouse gas. We have obviously engaged in several discussions regarding fleet transition, and it is possible that the state might actually regulate this or mandate such a plan. So the idea of bringing this up before the committee is just to get your general sense of, if we would like to have this discussion be early, set up a potential framework, and think of what kind of questions that we would want to ask or information we need to garner, so that whether we do this independently or it comes via a state mandate, that we are adequately prepared. It is assumed, but it is not necessarily settled that such a plan would fall under this committee. But given the general discussions that we've had over the last couple of years on this topic, it tends to be interest of our committee members, which is why we might start it here. So with that, I'd like to just turn it over to General Manager and CEO, Ms. Deborah Johnson, and give her the floor so that she can kind of present this topic and her perspective on what information we might need to know, or what framework we might want to set if we decide as a committee to move forward with this discussion early.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Deborah Johnson, General Manager and CEO. I appreciate the opportunity to opine on the matter, but really want to understand the direction in which the committee wants to go in as we talk about climate action plan, recognizing public transportation, regardless of alternative fuels, propulsion systems of the like. We still are reducing vehicle miles traveled by the nature of our core functional business. So want to better understand the intent of this effort relative to what it is that we're doing. I know in 2021 or 2022, off the top of my head, the board of directors did adopt a resolution by which we talked about reducing our carbon footprint. That was tied primarily to our facilities and fleet transition plan for our transit agencies whose primary focus is to deliver transit service. I believe we are making earnest steps relative to that, but would need to garner a better understanding from board members as to what it is outside of that realm that we are seeking to solve for. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson, for that excellent recap and framing. Do we have any comments from members of the body on this topic, or just general interest? And Co-Chair Hardwick, if you could just go ahead and let me know if anyone has raised their hand so I can call on them.
Director Nicholson has raised his hand.
Okay, thank you. Director Nicholson, you are recognized.
Thank you. So this has actually come up in conversations that I've had about the fleet transition plan and, RTD's climate planning when I spoke with Conservation Colorado last year. It was definitely something that they raised. My question actually to GMCEO Johnson's point is, there are in certainly in other states, measures by which you can purchase carbon offsets for a certain amount of money. And one question that I've had when we look at this is, if we're just looking from the perspective of reducing carbon, how much will what we're talking about cost relative to how much will it cost to just pay somebody else to offset instead. And that was sort of what popped for me when I read the fleet transition plan. So I think we shouldn't just be looking at what we can do. We should be looking at the overall question of how to have the largest carbon impact that we can, recognizing, as GMCO Johnson said, that in some ways the best things we can do is just get more people out of their cars and onto our buses and trains.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Nicholson. Ms. Johnson, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I appreciate, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Director Nicholson. I appreciate that. And he's absolutely right. Some other states have programs, for all intents and purposes, that are geared toward transit. I know in California, we had the Low Carbon Transit Operators Program, where those offsets are provided specifically to transit agencies that are providing service in areas as identified by the California Environmental Protection Agency that are eligible for funds to ensure that agencies are doing their part. While we don't have that here, that doesn't negate the ability of us to be intentional with the reduction of emissions and greenhouse gases for all intents and purposes. And relative to the comments that were made about the transition plan, with the emphasis being on facilities, because we are looking at facilities as well, not just those that would house vehicles for the intent of maintaining them and servicing them, but also relative to other administrative facilities holistically. So once again, I just need to garner a better understanding what the intent here is relative to what the board desires to do. So with that, I'll yield the floor back to you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO Johnson. I think right now, as we stated, you and I discussed, and I kind of opened with, is we're in a bit of a fact-finding stage. So my thought was perhaps, we have a discussion item, and we can dialogue about what that looks like. But my thinking is perhaps we invite the state to come and present their plan and how they arrived at their targets. Just recognizing that, with or without a legislative mandate, it might be just a good place to start to see where our partners are. And then, again, this is not necessarily something that the committee has to move on as far as an action or resolution, but maybe just get some a learning experience, if you would, and just get a basic set of facts so that, we can make those decisions independently or otherwise. Do we have any other comments on this matter? And feel free to share if you are kind of yes, no, maybe, keep it in the bike valet in terms of exploration. But understanding the committee's interest will certainly help us in terms of scheduling, be that internally or with external matters.
Director Pagliari is in queue, and then Director Whitmore is in queue after that.
Okay, Director Pagliari, you are recognized, and then immediately after, we will go to Director Whitmore. You are pre-authorized to speak.
Thank you, Chair Rusha. I have two quick things to say. One is I welcome a discussion about this to learn more and to get a sense of whether it's personal, being brought up to speed of what the agency is doing, and also to express my my intentions with this. But thank you, CEO and GM Johnson, for acknowledging something that I think is tricky to acknowledge sometimes. Is it's a cost benefit of doing zero emission for sometimes running emission producing vehicles are sometimes more expensive than zero emission vehicles and alternative technologies. And I think that we should have a discussion as a board, is like, what are we using to measure the cost and the benefit, and what are we willing to do? What benefits are we willing to forego in order to get to a zero emission system? For example, how many fewer buses do we run if we have to buy more expensive buses, for example? And then the other point is I like that you mentioned, Chair Rusha, that we should have the state present is thinking about the financial aspect is when we did the light rail and the commuter rail, for example, we made it electrified, and it seemed like in Colorado, there's kind of an expectation that we do the things that are a little bit more difficult because we think it's the right thing to do. And that could be the case with electrification and zero emission transportation system, but it costs money. And maybe identifying some routes to getting funding from the state if they're the ones who are asking us to do this, and maybe identifying how much it might cost to reach the goals, if we were to be able to ask for some more money or some support. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Pagliari. Director Whitmore.
Thank you. Pleased to be reauthorized. That's the highlight of my day, Madam Chair. To Deborah's point, by our nature, we are, a good vessel to do this very issue, and that's to eliminate as much carbon issues by, the whole notion of group transport. I guess I'm not 100% enthusiastic to get too carried away. The discussion perhaps would be fine. The reason why, as Director Pagliari mentioned, is the almighty dollar right now. There's going to be a lot of good bills killed at the state capitol because there's fiscal notes that are unattainable. And, this whole lack of clarity about federal funds, at least for a while, makes me wonder if there really is a chest of money to help us get to those goals. So I think discussion, yes, maybe some outlines of what we have been doing that works in our current budget system and what might be possible to move the needle a bit would be good. But I guess maybe my parting words are proceed with caution, but go ahead and proceed. So thank you for the time.
Director Rusha, we have Director Chandler, and then I'd like to speak after that.
Absolutely, and thank you everyone for being entertained by my malapropisms. Director Chandler, you are recognized. Welcome and thank you.
Well, thank you for having this discussion. I do have 2 points. One would be to figure out kind of what this agency is being forced to do by the state government. I think we don't have that, and until we know what we're actually being asked to do, I don't think we should start planning, because that could drastically change, and so I think going down that road very far would be foolish in our time, energy, and dollars wasted. So I think that's something we need to wait to see. And I think that was to, Director Whitmore's point as well, and to Director Pagliari's point. And then my second point is that there are so many inputs that are part of this electrification, grid capacity, all of these other things that are beyond our control. So let's say, that the agency does go to electric. Well, what if there isn't enough output? And all of a sudden, the grid is not reliable. We put ourselves in a position where everything from buses to our, light rail system is now at risk. And so I'm not sure that that's something that we should not think about. We should think about the actual other inputs that are not just, what's the end product, but all of those things that are going to go. Because as we as a society continue to go towards that electrification, there's a lot of things that the PUC needs to come up with before I think we need to jump into that. And so I hope we're looking at all of those inputs as well, and not just what we think we can do, but how we can sustain it over time.
Thank you, Director Chandler. Keen points. Director Nicholson.
Yeah, I just wanted to suggest that given the long work plan we have to discuss, we might want to move on from this and get, because people may have comments on everything else, basically. So.
All right, moving along then. I don't see any other hands raised for this item, although my co-facilitator, Chair Harwick here did have a comment.
I actually was just gonna echo Director Chandler. I think we should kind of wait and see. And to be honest, I actually think this was my idea last year or the year before. But I think we're better off instead of like getting ahead of our skis. We should wait and know what we're up against, and then we can really look at this and also be able to take the other things into consideration, like our our fleet transition plan. Like that's a big thing in front of us. It's a lot of information. And let's not borrow, bite off more than we can chew right now, and let's wait and see what we gonna have land in our laps, if anything.
Sounds good. I'm hearing from the committee that we're in fact-finding discussion, half out of the Bike Valley mode. Perhaps we'll schedule something in the future for a discussion item, not necessarily action. And so I'll go ahead and confer with staff, and then we'll follow up on that matter. So moving on to the next item, and this was one that I raised, and it was actually service animals and our code of conduct. We've discussed this a little bit before, but I just wanted to hear from our general manager and CEO. This wouldn't be an action item. It might come back to us as a presentation from staff or, as an FYI, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about any efforts that we are undergoing or could engage in to reduce the number of pets and vests, as we've called them, or just unrestrained pets on our system, as that does pose a threat to our passengers and our staff alike. And I apologize if that one seemed like a hot potato. I do believe I dialogued a little bit with Mr. Wortham last year during a committee meeting about it, but it has come up with constituents, and so I flagged it for the committee. Director Pagliari, unless Ms. Johnson, you had anything you wanted to offer.
Yes, thank you very kindly for that. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I do recall that this, once you provided the context, that come up before, and I've engaged with several different entities about this, because I do know not just on buses, but other places whereby people will try to leverage animals with the vest for other purposes, not as a service animal. I don't have any information readily available as it relates to complaints that we have had. Interestingly enough, ADA-related complaints, I happened to meet with our ADA manager yesterday and have stats relative to service animal complaints, which are really minimal when you think about where we are. We've only had 2 complaints on light rail over the course of 2024, light rail and commuter rail. And as it relates to bus, we only had 23. And when you think about the number of boardings that we have in the millions, that is de minimis. But that does not negate the point that you've raised, that you've heard from constituents. I just am really not certain as to what it is that we're trying to do at this juncture, keeping in mind that we train our frontline employees, recognizing we have to ensure that we're respecting people's civil rights. If somebody says they have a service animal, operators don't challenge that quite naturally because it could put them in a precarious situation, as well as the agency as a whole. But there could be other instances. So I need to garner a better understanding of the issue before I can really clearly say whether or not we're trying to solve something, because I have not heard anything to the contrary. And have engaged in other entities that are familiar with this from a disability advocacy vantage point, working with CCDC last year. So that's all I have to offer at this time, but am more than willing to engage at another time with you and the co-chair of this committee to garner a better understanding of what we're trying to solve for. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Director Pagliari.
Thank you. This is Director Pagliari. Sorry, I forgot to say that last time. I think. Thank you, Chair. I was just going to quickly say that the only animal issues that I've heard about thus far in my representation of my district have been failure to follow rules on buses and light rail vehicles. not necessarily related to service animals or not service animals, specifically just animals, dogs sitting on seats when they should be on the floor. And I will echo. I wouldn't necessarily be against this, but I would be interested in figuring out if you're trying, what more specifically you're trying to prevent dogs from owners from, like saying an animal is a service animal when it's not a service animal. Is that correct?
I'll go ahead and answer your question, Director Pagliari. So just for clarification, so GMCO Johnson is right. We don't challenge when somebody says that they have a service animal. There are some animals that are not, recognized as service animals, but we also don't want to put our operators in a potential, in a bad situation either. So we have to strike that balance. I think I've noted before, we've had snakes on our bus that were titled emotional support snakes. So just as a matter of background, some other agencies have piloted programs where it was completely voluntary, where a person with a service animal could, again, completely voluntarily register and get an ID for that service animal. We cannot force any sort of registration. That would be unlawful. But that combined with just communication and public relations efforts can also dramatically, reduce the quote pets invest unquote, and that's my phrase, and also ensure compliance for those who are just bringing their pet on the system, and they need to make sure that they're following our rules regarding restraints and the like. Director Nicholson.
Yeah, so I mean, I think for me, the challenge, I shouldn't say challenge here, but like at the end of the day, so I ride the bus every day, and there are people bring their dogs on the bus every day, regardless of whether they're wearing a vest or not. And the operators, I think rightly, just, let them come on. They don't try to push back. And, for a lot of people, that's the only way to get their pets around. I think we are sort of looking at this backward. I think we should be exploring whether or not we should just be having a pet license. I got no, I'm not. Sorry. Where I think we should be having a pet licensing program. Doesn't look like I'm on screen. And as a result of that, let people who are willing to follow certain rules say, okay, you can bring your dog on a leash on the bus. Because if people are doing it anyway, why not put in, rules in place? And that might cut down on people pretending to have a service animal as a way to get around that, and also ensure, greater compliance. So.
Thank you, Director Nicholson. So I don't see any other hands raised. What I think I'll do is just confer with GMCO Johnson and staff, and this could probably, as we say, be handled in a memo. We can go ahead and send out one, or she can send out one, excuse me. And I think it would also be good for us to just recap what our current code of conduct states, so that we are starting from the same point, as well as any FTA regulations on the matter. And we'll just decide if it's something that we want to take up as a committee later. I did hear, I think I heard, commentary on dogs being leashed or unleashed. Currently, our code of conduct requires that a pet or cat, whatever your pet is, be in a carrier. And so we, unlike some other transit agencies, we don't have a provision for a leash. And I wonder if that is inadvertently incentivizing folks to try to get around that rule, particularly if their animal is too large. So with that, I think we're going to move just to the next portion of our discussion, excuse me, and that is continuing ed and interest in industry topics. We are currently at 5:33, so we'll try to wrap up in the next couple of minutes, but this is an opportunity for directors to share any interest they might have. And this would be a little bit new. This was done in the past in other committees, but we just want to welcome anyone's suggestions. Director Nicholson, you are recognized.
Yeah, so I actually had a sort of related question. I thought this was to discuss the work plan I had things to comment on the work plan in order to that I had questions about. Should we do that now? When is that in this agenda?
Thank you for that point of clarification, Director Nicholson. So the discussion item before us is just our work plan. So the things that we've talked about, because they might show up on our work plan because they would be discussion items or things we would calendar as part of our work plan. So what I was just trying to do is get some things out of the bike valet, if you would, before we just open up to general questions. But with that, I don't see any other hands raised regarding continuing ed topics. I will send out or have the board office send out an email just to follow up. I did get some initial responses back regarding continuing education for things that are on our calendar. And I've shared that with staff, and we will make sure that everyone is accommodated in that regard. But for the sake of time, I'm more than happy to just move on, and we can open it up just for general comments or questions regarding the work plan so that we may close and have a successful meeting next week to wrap it up. Director Nicholson, you're recognized again.
Thank you. So the item that I submitted on that was we ended up combining with Director Harwick's item on sort of IT updates. The language that I had sent over to you included the first step in this being a report on real-time service information, schedule information. And I didn't see that added to the work plan for April, which is what we had discussed. So I saw something on a different topic, and I was wondering what that was. I saw something on fare collection strategies and tactics, but I didn't see anything on real-time schedule data, which was the first part of the overall IT conversation. And I can reread the language that I sent you if that's helpful.
I'm aware of the language, and I might also be looking at a different version of our work plan than what was published. But feel free, Director Nicholson, if you'd like.
Yeah. So where is it? Here it is. So the language was, and you got this part in, by June 30th, 2026, a working group will complete a comprehensive transit technology plan that outlines current technology infrastructure with particular focus on operational technology, identifies future technology needs, and recommends strategies for implementation. So that's what's in there already. And then as part of this effort, the chair shall immediately request a report from staff on the status of real-time schedule information systems for producing, distributing, and displaying it, including the mechanisms involved, how the systems work, the reliability of those systems, the existing issues with their functionality, any plans in place to remedy those issues, and what resources are needed to put those remedies into place. This report shall be presented no later than the April 2025 OSS meeting. Basically, we know there are challenges, significant ones, in place right now with real-time scheduling. We don't display that information currently on the light rail. We've had significant outages over the last year with real-time data being sent to the transit app and Google Maps. And it comes up every day with people wondering when these things are going to get fixed. So I think it is incumbent upon us to recognize that this is an urgent issue, and I know that there is being significant work done by the agency at this moment, just from email conversations and one-off conversations I've had with GM CEO Johnson. But I think that we owe it to people to have an actual presentation that goes over what's going on and how soon we expect to get fixes and what's been causing all these problems as soon as is practicable. And I think it's February 1st. If we say the middle of April to do this, that's a reasonable target. But one of the reasons I wanted to bring it up here is if GM CEO Johnson wants to push back and say no, we need till May, I'm open to that argument. But I just think we need to understand what's going on.
Thank you, Director Nicholson. Does any staff like to weigh in? I know that was quite a bit. Yeah, go ahead.
Madam Chair, Thank
Yes,
you,
absolutely.
Deborah Johnson. Thank you very much, Director Nicholson. Having not had the opportunity to confer with staff, I would suggest that we push it out till May. We have a process here when we present items where we start weeks in advance. So the elements that we're bringing forward, we have been drafting 6 weeks ago. And so recognizing where we are with something delivered for April, we should already be in the process, but I want to have the opportunity to confer with the appropriate staff, recognizing we're juggling a myriad of things, but that doesn't negate the need for information to be disseminated to all of you, and want you to know that I'm amenable to it. But at this point in time, if we could say May, I would appreciate that, so we can be intentional and deliberate in reference to providing the information in which you need to engage with your constituents and offer support to staff as we try to navigate legacy systems and antiquated elements. As you indicated, Director Nicholson, we have been working on a myriad of different elements for a while, and I want to ensure that we can provide information that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. So I think what I would offer is that, you know, because we had a lot of IT related discussion on Saturday, and inquiries. What we'll do is we'll just collectively work together and see what can be addressed sooner. And I also just want to but also recognize that staff needs time, and we had quite a list. I also just want to note that we are still in the middle of hiring a CTIO, so some of these things might need to come after that person has been onboarded and fully acclimated and presented their own internal plans. Mr. Kroll, I see your hand.
Thank you, Committee Chair Rusha. I just want to flag, as GM and CEO Johnson raised an important consideration with respect to items the committee and board are requesting on the work plan. And, you know, there is a long process, a thorough process internally for staff to develop items for presentation to the board to ensure their accuracy, to ensure that they're collaborative, and to ensure that they're encompassing, you know, the broad swath of potential information that is relevant to the topic at hand. And just an observation from where I sit on the work plan as it is currently drafted, there is a lot of front loading on this work plan through the first 5 months, and I offer it as just an observation and a recommendation that potentially there be some consideration of taking some of these items that are in the March, April, May timeframe and looking to slot those in later in the year, potentially in September, October, and November. You know, the capacity for the committee to focus on items, and really the board, is really contingent upon how much is on the agenda. And I just worry that the committee may, you know, not be able to give as much attention to some of these big items if they're all coming in the first half of the year. So I just leave that as a recommendation and an observation.
Thank you, sir. We'll certainly keep efficiency in mind. Also, just to note, some of these items might be equally suited for FMP, so we will confer with them as well. Director Chandler, you're recognized.
Thank you, Director Rusha. My question mostly has to do with all of the open positions that are wanting to be hired, because my questions might be better addressed by after the next police chief is onboarded. I think Director Nicholson's question might be better addressed once the new IT person's up and running. So I think what we need to do is specifically ask, what is a work plan for those positions being hired for? Of course, we need those informations to push an agenda along, but that might push this out even farther to Mr. Kroll's point of once they're hired, then that will be part of their onboarding, which then in turn would give us that information. So perhaps that's what we're looking for, more as like timelines of different when things are going to be hired for, so that we can plan on when we should start asking those questions, and when should the staff then start to formulate that so we can move those agenda items forward.
Thank you, Director Chandler. And also that was a reminder to me, because I neglected to mention, excuse me, it is like a full-time job in Colorado to stay hydrated. Today's no exception. I neglected to mention during housekeeping, and that is HR matters are being moved to performance. So those updates that we previously received from our Chief People Officer, Ms. Charlene Pelegi, will be heard in performance. All the queries that I received and data requests, I am compiling and sending to staff and to GM CEO Johnson, so she's aware, because that used to come before this committee. And then as far as RTD PD, we did, upon request and concurrence, slate their presentation a little bit earlier, which will be April. There will also be a training, I believe, held within the next week or two, shortly, regarding RTPD, which might handle some questions, but I think this committee and others had more in depth and wanted to get a status update on personnel matters and operational matters. So with that, when we do have a new chief, we will absolutely make space to recognize and welcome them in this committee. But it might still be prudent, even with our schedule, to get an update as soon as practicable, which looks like it would be, I think, the April calendar. Director Nicholson, you are recognized, and to your point, it is 5:45, but go ahead.
Just to, I wanted to say that to GMCO Johnson that May is fine for this item. So if we can put that on the May calendar, and since it really won't be an action item, it will be a, hey, thank you for this report. We can just, hear it there, or even punt it to the main board meeting and hear the report there. We don't need to do it twice, but this is something that has come up. It comes up in every conversation. It is quite honestly why I ran for the board, was out of frustration with the quality of the data that I was getting and the number of times that I would miss a bus because the schedule would be inaccurate. And I hear it in practically every conversation I have. So when I say it's necessary to move on it, I mean that. I also don't necessarily think we need to hear from the new CTIO on this, because it's really more a question of what's happening right now and what are we doing right now. So it's less about what could we do once this guy gets hired, but just tell me the state of things and where we're at and how it's going and what the, because I think the public just has no understanding of why the results they're getting are the results they're getting. And I think we need to just make it be clear with them about why we're producing the results that we are in terms of giving them the information that we are.
Thank you. Director Chandler, I see your hand raised.
Sorry again thank you, Chairman Ruscia, for recognizing me. Just a clarifying question. So are you saying that the hiring process will only be discussed in the performance committee, and we will then be notified of what's happening, or what does that process look like for this committee? Because I think some of those questions are paramount to that. Not that we have anything to do with the hiring process or whatever, but that we should just maybe get an update. Or when you find out when those are going to be discussed, please let us know so we can attend those meetings to hear that for ourselves. That would be very, very helpful, because I can't go to every single committee meeting. So it would be helpful to know if they're going to discuss that ahead of time, that we are privy to that so that I can attend, if that's the only place I'm going to hear that information. You're muted.
Thank you. Noted, and we will make sure that other agendas are also communicated, as well as that transfer of information over to Performance Committee. But I do see that GM CEO Johnson has her hand raised. Ms. Johnson, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Committee Chair Ruscia, and thank you, Director Chandler. Just for clarification, when we're talking about hiring with positions, I just wanted to ensure that we're singing from the same hymnal. There are certain elements relative to what was stated regarding the Chief People Officer providing an update on our people power just in general as it relates to our transit service delivery, i.e. be it an electromechanic versus a general repair mechanic and things of the like. What I was inferring from this discussion were more or less all positions are critical to this organization, so let me qualify my statement, but there's some germane to topics in which you were saying. What I can do is provide an update, recognizing where we are, which I have done thus far with some of those positions and will continue to do so. But I just wanted to share that for everyone's edification, because I was blurring some of these matters and just wanted to ensure that it wasn't blurred for everybody else. Thank you very kindly for the opportunity to share that.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Much appreciated. And thanks also to your staff for all the work that they do to present information to us and help us facilitate our own roles and help each other as directors. With that, I don't see any other hands in the queue. Okay, so are there any other, I'm gonna go ahead and close this part of discussion. It sounds like we are pretty prepared for next week. Everything might not be buttoned up and settled, but I think we've all been heard, and procedure wise, we're fairly good to go for the year, if not the next, as noted, 5 months. Are there any other, for the good of the order, matters? Seeing no hands raised, the next Operations Safety and Security meeting is scheduled for next week, Wednesday, February 12th. That meeting will be busy. We're going to consider on-demand funding, which was previously authorized in our budget. Cameras for light rail vehicles, summary scope of work and contracting for security services, as well as vote to adopt our committee work plan, which again, as you know, is subject to change. We will also hear a discussion on the proposed service changes that would take place, be effectuated in May of 2025. So next week will be the discussion, and that vote will follow in March. Seeing no other discussion or hands raised, this meeting is adjourned at 5:50 p.m. Mountain Time. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful night.